Hi everybody, welcome back to start of chapter 2 in this Madame Part 1 Bittersweet Goodbyes. At chapter 2 we're going to be introduced to three characters, the main characters that start formulating throughout the story. One is Madame herself, a bit of a background about her. Two is the introduction of Sheila, her once loyal companion that returns to her homestead. And three, Father Peter himself, the young ambitious Father Peter at the time that arrives at Linden Hall to save the day. Let's begin now at Madame, it's called, chapter 2. Living at Linden Hall, routines meant everything, especially when we were in our early teenage years. And Madame insisted that when visitors were expected, my brothers and I received a hearty breakfast before we began our normal routine. We were to have no contact with any of the guests. Before the arrival of some of the guests, Linden Hall was cleaned thoroughly. Madame would then address appropriately to meet them. On one particular day, Father Peter was expected, and Madame insisted that she herself would go to Glendora, our neighbouring village, to choose the freshest vegetables and meat required for such an occasion. The locals treated her with caution. Some even referred to her as a witch because she always wore black. It was rumoured that Madame had once to be married, but was jilted at the altar. A farmhouse her father had left her had now remained empty on the estate, and Madame ordered that it remained untouched by any of her staff. The wedding presents she received remained unopened, stored now within the cottage to this day. Only 1 week before the wedding, her future husband had finalised all the plans concerning the decoration of the cottage, and Madame in turn had named the cottage Hatton Cottage, and had it blessed by her pastor for luck. They were due to move into the cottage on her father's estate when they returned from their honeymoon. Thereafter, on many occasions, her parents tried to marry off Madame to various individuals. However, all of their efforts were in vain. Madame found fault with every one of them. The local pastor who baptized Madame had watched her grow into a fine woman of substance, even failed in his efforts to win her heart. The local said she fell pregnant before the wedding itself and lost the baby from shock, and that her fiancé then eloped to England with one of the maids her parents employed. After all of this, Madame soon became a recluse, locking herself into a room which served as a bedroom along with anything else she desired it to be. During the war years, she suffered further grief by the death of both her parents. Her father died of a heart attack, and her mother died of a broken heart shortly after. Her father had run the estate like a young man, even tilling the land himself on many occasions, due to the lack of labour. His death coincided with many men leaving the countryside to seek alternative employment. There was mass immigration. So all able-bodied men to replace him, and the workload had left the country and had headed to find their fortunes in a new life, in America, England or Australia. It left Madame with only the very young and infirmed, and barely a skeletal staff to continue working the farm. She became disheartened and became withdrawn into herself, finding her only comfort in alcohol. And Madame's drinking grew heavier and affected her ability to make sensible decisions, resulting in her losing both her self-confidence and a charismatic personality, hence her sombre appearance. It was not long before Madame began to look mentally tired, haggard and frail. Then one day Sheila, Madame's one faithful servant, returned to the farm in search of lodgings. On seeing the state of Madame on a personal level, Sheila felt it her duty to help this previously beautiful woman return to her once glorious self, in return for free lodgings. And Sheila ploughed 3 acres of arable land on the estate the best she could during this period to provide enough food for both her and Madame to survive. Unfortunately, times were not good at all, and life in general was deteriorating rapidly. Only the man above will ever know how the two of them managed to survive for so long. Speculation and rumours were rife among the villagers of Glendora, who were of the opinion that Madame was a witch that cast a spell on Sheila, resulting in the two of them taking on the manner of mad dogs. However, this was not the case. Instead, the simple lifestyle to which they become accustomed allowed them to keep them both and their heads above water. Madame continued to spend all her time locked inside the bedroom, looking out of the window and reminiscing on the good days, and Sheila remained nearby, either pottering about feeding the remaining livestock or fixing up the house. Though the family fortune was quickly diminishing, Madame insisted on holding on to the estate at all costs, and the house she loved, called Linden Hall. No one was more surprised or grateful in the end than Madame was when Father Peter, a young ambitious priest at the time, suddenly appeared on her doorstep. Requesting to see Madame immediately, he remained defiant for over 3, 4, 5 hours, until Sheila eventually agreed to his demands. Father Peter was a handsome man, and very confident with it at this time, and the locals loved him, for his parents had been well-respected people in their day, and this ensured that Father Peter, having returned to his home place to practice the faith, had a new and radical ideas listened to, both by the church and the local parishioners because of this. The local women loved him, and the men who had respected his parents, in turn, were very willing and able to help him at any cost. One day, with Father Peter put... Sorry about this. Dry throat. One day, Father Peter put to the Archbishop before visiting Madame was that Linden Hall could be the perfect rest home for foreign religious dignitaries. It could provide first-class accommodation, he said, and for them to relax while visiting the locality. It could also serve as a holiday home for the most senior clergy and elderly within Ireland. The grounds surrounding the home were perfect for shooting, and the local river was renowned for salmon fishing. He assured the Archbishop that for a small initial sum, along with an annual fee, he could convince Madame to agree to this idea, and she would in turn manage the running of Linden Hall, but he would preside over the welfare of her guests. Father Peter was of the opinion that Madame would jump at this opportunity and would allow her to return to the lifestyle which she was once accustomed. This new proposal for Madame's home would also provide a monthly wage for Sheila, enabling her to care for Madame much better. His plan was to staff the estate with all the boys from the local workhouse known locally as the Maze, and men from the village of Glendora would supervise, while the priests residing at Linden Hall would in turn govern them. The convent would supply the work of the cooks and the cleaning staff, and these older boys would bring Linden Hall back to its former glory over a period of time, whilst the women took care of the household chores and continued the upkeep. Madame herself would manage the day-to-day operations, just as she'd done when her parents were living. The church would only intervene in the operation of a home if the staff caused any problems, or if Madame requested assistance. Father Peter himself would personally oversee the entire operation and promote Linden Hall on completion of all the renovation work. Once up and running, the income from the estate would go towards alleviating some of the poverty in Glendora, with any extra monies used to upgrade the church in Glendora when required. Being a huge fan of both salmon fishing and game hunting, the Archbishop readily agreed with Father Peter's proposal. However, the Archbishop made one stipulation. Madame would have the final say at all times on activities at Linden Hall. She was never to be pressurized into anything to which she did not agree. This was so Madame would not feel awkward in her own home. He was therefore handing her full autonomy to run Linden Hall in her own way. Through gritted teeth, Father Peter agreed. The Archbishop then said he would draft up a contract to this effect, just so that there would be no misunderstanding. If Madame agreed to the conditions of the contract and signed it, only then could Father Peter go ahead with the proposal, and with the Archbishop's full blessing. Father Peter was in fine form when he made his way to Madame that morning at Linden Hall. Clutching the agreement tightly in his hands, Father Peter smiled as he stood at the entrance for so many hours, and then made his way to the front doors from the gates of the garden. From her usual perch at the bedroom window, Madame had a clear view of this handsome priest approaching. It did upset Madame somewhat to see Father Peter surveying the grounds and making notes while doing so, both mentally and written. Nevertheless, she wasn't offended upon seeing this. She chose to rather ignore it. Instead, she began to dress herself suitably in order to receive this young and pertinent priest. These days, Madame may not have had much money, but she always retained her pride and dignity by dressing well for such occasions as this. Eventually, on Madame's instruction, Sheila announced Father Peter's arrival. Believing patience is a virtue, Madame also kept the priest waiting for some time before joining him in the dining room. Madame's attire was formal, even though slightly dated. She wore a black dress that she used to keep for special occasions. Her hair was perfumed with white powder, which she also used on her face, and the result was one of complete serenity, hiding the worn looks and dark circles underneath her eyes. The result was serene. A matching pair of small earrings complemented the lace headpiece along with her mother's gold brooch, worn on her shoulder, highlighting her refined stature. As she prepared to greet him, he stood in nervous anticipation of her arrival. Shocked by Madame's sudden transformation, Sheila left the room almost immediately to make tea. However, this was also an excuse, as she felt very inadequate standing next to Madame. The aroma of Madame's lavender perfume won favour with Father Peter, making him instantly relaxed. Madame insisted that he sat down while she remained standing, a ploy she often used to give the illusion of grandeur over her guests. This ploy obviously worked, as Father Peter seemed quite intimidated by her very tall, statuesque figure. He also related his story and became unnerved by Madame's constant stare and silence, which made him repeatedly stammer. Once he had finished, Father Peter then waited for a reaction. Sheila intervened at this stage as she handed out the tea, stating that Father Peter must have an answer today. Madame silenced Sheila by waving her out of the room with her hand. Next, Madame, making an excuse to leave for a few minutes, headed for the sanctuary of the old library. There she opened an old writing bureau that once had belonged to her father, and in private Madame cried her heart out. Clutching the contract in her hands, she begged her father in silent prayer to forgive her for all that she was about to agree to. However, with no other way out of the mess from his handing the estate he had so lovingly bequeathed her, Madame felt she had no choice but to agree to Father Peter's proposal. Examining her conscience, Madame was happy once she had reread the agreement that she would be in charge. Kissing her mother's brooch on her shoulder, she walked back to the dining room, where Father Peter was still patiently waiting. Even though she instantly disliked Father Peter, she reassured herself in the knowledge that the Archbishop was to oversee everything himself, so therefore Madame signed the agreement. Madame knew that by signing this contract, Linden Hall had a chance of being restored back to its former glory whilst being paid for the privilege. Comforted in this knowledge that she would also remain in charge, Madame called Sheila to co-sign the agreement as a witness. Having completed the task in full, Madame told Father Peter that he could inform His Eminence that she accepted the offer and that she would be in contact with him in the near future. In an abrupt manner, Madame then instructed Sheila to escort Father Peter out of her home. Dismissed like a messenger boy, Father Peter omitted to sign the agreement. Unknowingly, Madame watched him depart and immediately felt much calmer within herself. She was determined to show Father Peter, who was still in charge of Linden Hall, regarded such an agreement. And as Madame went to lie down in her bedroom, she looked out of the window one final time, confused and nervous about the radical changes that were going to happen at Linden Hall. Nevertheless, she reassured herself that Father Peter was too afraid to cause her any problems, especially when she had the Archbishop's support. Over the coming years, Father Peter was to prove how wrong she was. Visits from Father Peter were regular, but Madame's confidence grew with each one, enabling her to tolerate Father Peter for as long as it was necessary. And following a visit to the workhouse, Madame met with Father Peter and informed him that she would like someday to have children of her own. Delighted upon hearing this, Father Peter encouraged Madame to become more involved with the children there. He knew that the more this happened, the more maternal instincts would grow within herself. Madame, already aware of this, kept herself emotionally detached by having no personal one-to-one involvement with any of the children. And over the years, as they rolled on, she noticed that the children only became quiet in her company if she was accompanied by Father Peter. One day she decided, curiosity took over, to ask a young boy in the workhouse, why is this so that you remain so quiet when I come into the room with Father Peter, but without Father Peter you talk to me freely? The boy remained silent. On answering her question, left Madame somewhat perplexed. The choice to stop her visits to the workhouse was a difficult one that saddened her greatly. She thought she could have the best of both worlds, one job caring for the children as she grew to love at the workhouse, and the other managing Linden Hall, her beloved home. But this was not to be. In chapter 2, as I continue in my next video, I will give you an introduction to another character called Sister Anne. The title being Sister Anne's Arrival. Thank you for listening to part 1 of chapter 2 of my story, Madame Bittersweet Goodbyes. I hope you continue to enjoy it and watch my previous